Well, I think I've been doing this similar work for the past 10 years. And it started with landscape. I was in a boat, I was in northern Russia.
With like big mast and sails and stuff?
No, it was like
It was like a motorboat?
boat. It was like a huge motorboat with like a bunch of people who were getting around between the mainland and the archipelago.
What landed you there? That's such a good story.
I got a grant to go and photograph Solovki, which is the Solovetsky Islands. So I got a grant to go photograph, and I took my friend and we went. And I had my camera, and there was a bunch of people who were, people generally are not comfortable with a lens into their face. So I had a camera on my neck, and I was just kind of secretly taking photos. And it was just a beautiful foggy day, and we got far away from the land where you couldn't see anything around you. And it was very foggy, so you couldn't see where the ocean and the horizon blended. So it was just like this one continuous void, this like gray. And of course I was looking at it and like, I wonder, just as a photographer, you always ask yourself, what if? So I'm like, what if I just take a bunch of photos?
I think that's like the arts in general. I think that's like the essential.
The what if question, yeah. So I took a bunch of photos.
And you didn't know how they
I took 6. I remember I took 6 photos.
That's it?
And then I came back to the States, developed film, and started printing, and didn't even think anything about those images. And then when I started printing them, I saw that there was this very, very subtle gradation, and you could see the waves in such a very, very subtle way. As I started printing them more and more and playing with contrast and filters, I could see very, very subtle details. One photo had like this beautiful white line just in between the water and the horizon. And I was just so completely blown away by such detail that it's not so obvious and just so subtle that you have to really be very sensitive to notice that. And it's nothing that you can see in the real world. I think there's this conversation about photography as reality, but I think we don't look reality in still moments. Reality is always moving.
It's in movement, yeah.
So it was absolutely, I was fascinated with this idea of how little information you need to perceive something.
Or for it to trigger something in you, like trigger a thought or a feeling or something.
So, and then I started coming up with different themes that were related to this idea of nothingness and
looking
how little
at detail. And what's specific about this one that's different from the other incarnations of that?
The paper project?
Yeah, the paperscapes. And they do feel like landscapes. To look at them close up and realize like, oh, that's like paper, but from far away they do feel like landscapes. For me, it was like looking at them was like being given permission to let in or acknowledge thoughts and feelings that are going on anyway, but that we don't give ourselves time or space to acknowledge, And so I was like pretty sure that your work wasn't intending to make me feel those specific things.
Well, I think it's going back to the same thing. Is this the thoughts? And I'm assuming you're not thinking about an elephant or a cat. It's just those thoughts are just really on the like at your fingertips, like
like a micro level.
Yeah, exactly. They're not a thought that you can say, well, I'm thinking about something concrete. They're just like going in between. It's almost like you're walking down the steps and you're in your head and you're wondering whether there's another step or not, whether your brain, this pre-programmed sequence of what you're doing currently, and then at some point you start doubting and you're like, is there another step or is there not? And that's kind of what I feel my goal is, to kind of trigger that kind of situation where it's nothing concrete and it's not so abstract that you have no connection to it. Yeah. And in terms of reality, and there's this big argument: is this reality? Is this not reality? I think everything is reality if it's happening here and now.
Yeah.
So it's about that moment, and you shared it very nicely.
Yeah, and like the space in them felt like space to think and feel. I guess I didn't know what to expect. you know? And I knew they were minimal or whatever, because Jenny makes jokes about like, oh, I think I accidentally like, you know, used one of her pieces as like, I thought it was just a piece of paper. Yeah.
Sometimes we find ourselves like looking at the piece of paper. It's like, is this just
the
a
one?
piece?
Yeah. Which is kind of amazing. It's kind of like the whole idea of the project. That moment where you had the water damage and you had to destroy like 2 years worth of work because of the insurance company's stupid rules. Well, I don't know. Did that change you in some way? Like, what did that do to you? Did it change?
I thought it didn't. I honestly thought it didn't, and I was thinking that I would destroy an artwork. It's just like you have to say goodbye to certain things, and most of my work is just sitting in boxes in the basement anyway. Mm-hmm. So it has no life besides the gallery where it's exhibited. Mm-hmm. And most of the time, you know, you have a site-specific installation and you don't really ask to do it again.
Right.
So for me, it was years of this kind of work that I'm doing it for this particular space and it can't exist anywhere else because it was specific for the site and the lighting that existed in the site. Mm. Even though some works were not site-specific and, you know, but I feel like there's always growth and you can't cherish something that you've done years ago, and holding on to objects is something that we all do. Something gets destroyed, like your favorite beautiful cup gets broken and you're sad, but you just go and buy a new cup, you know. And I have a similar, it was sad. I mean, yes, I cried after I destroyed everything and was like, and I was questioning my relationship to that work. But on the other hand, for me, it was such a relief.
Did it make you feel like, because as a performer, I think the reason I make visual art, even though I'm not trained and I'm not like, you know, I don't have the theory and whatever, I'm not a professional, but I think something in me wants to make things in the concrete world, because as a performer, you make something and it's gone. It's just, once it's out there, it's in the air, it's gone, you never recapture it again, it's never the same from night to night.
What about music? What do you think musicians are different?
I feel the same way between performing music and recording it, or making a film and doing theater. But like live performance, I feel like is where I come from. And so recording feels great because it's like photography. You're capturing a moment, you know, and concretizing it, which I think there's something really appealing about that after like a life in the theater, you know, where like, you're like, yeah, God, I really love that show and what it did. But so in a way, you are riding this line between creating an experience as a performance would.
I think it's definitely about the experience and the impact. It's not about image making. And it's hard for me to I've been reestablishing my relationship with photography because it is about image making, and it is about like freezing reality, freezing the moment. And I think some of the photos in the show are just a little bit heavy-handed. Some of the most contrasty ones with available light. I think a lot of them, I really love doing them, and I enjoyed every bit of it. But once they're on the wall, I'll look at them and I'm thinking I probably overstepped my boundaries a little bit.
I don't feel that way. I don't know. They were really different. Like the feeling that I got from them was really different. But for me, it was like I've often noticed like shadow play or whatever. Like you're laying in your bed and there's a little bit of light coming in through the window and you see like branches dancing on your ceiling or like stuff like that, and what that feels like and the kinds of thoughts that you have in those moments, because generally it's dark, you know, quiet when you're noticing those kinds of images. And so for me, it like conjured all of that stuff, and it didn't feel heavy-handed. It didn't feel like you were saying this is what you're supposed to be thinking about. You know, it felt like, again, like an invitation to acknowledge thoughts, you know.
For me, it was a little bit of that prescription in there, you know, like, remember those shadows dancing on your walls?
Remember?
Just think of me. Think of my work next time.
I will.
Yeah. But it's just like, I don't want to do that.
Yeah.
I want it to be very subtle. And then also the bringing attention to the paper. With that series, and I don't think it was successful, what I was trying to do, so those shadows, highlights, they were caught on a piece of paper.
Yeah.
And I was really focusing on the texture of the paper and how much the question would exist between, is this like real texture of the paper? Is it something that was photographed and printed? So there's this back and forth.
Yeah.
Is it real or is it an image printed on paper? And I don't know how successful I communicated that in the work.